Hello and welcome everyone to the Climate Conundrum podcast. I'm Sanika Diwanji, your host, and today we're doing an episode that is an extremely important one of the foundational topics when you talk about climate change. The entire discussion around energy transition cannot be complete without first understanding what is energy, what is power. So we have a very special guest with us today, Ajay Shah. He's going to shed some light on this topic from a scientific point of view, but also from an economic and foundational perspective. So Ajay is a senior research fellow and the co-founder of XKDR Forum, which is a research organization based out of Mumbai. He studied in IIT Bombay and USC in Los Angeles and has held multiple positions, including at Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, at the Indira Gandhi Institute for Development Research, Department of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance and National Institute for Public Finance and Policy. I think I will let him introduce himself and his work briefly, rather than me just reading out
You're
a
doing
couple of
fine.
items.
You're doing fine. This is
Yeah,
all
no, I would
would have
love to
wanted
know
to say.
more about your work as well. So welcome to the show, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah.
I think I want to start with some basics on what energy is, right? Because for me as a layperson, when I hear of energy, I have several ideas in my mind, right? From something which is the physics definition that we learn in school, um, like energy is the ability to do work. Two, then I come and think about when I flick a switch, electricity comes on, and I get a bill at the end of the month. That is my energy bill. So between all of this, when I think of the whole news reportage and the discussion on energy transition, how does one explain energy on a fundamental level?
Okay. So first, at a fundamental level, there is energy as a means of doing work, and there is energy as a means of heating something. And many, many years ago, the scientists figured out that they are all the same, and there are various devices and machines which can convert one into another, so that there is only one thing called energy, and it can be converted into the motion of vehicles, into hot water in a coffee machine, and so on. So they're all the same at heart. They are energy. And so it's good to think about how energy is made and how energy is transported and how energy is delivered into its end point of application. Okay, and there are a couple of different mechanisms that are at work. There is the entire fossil fuels industry, okay,
Yes.
which is coal, oil, and gas. Here, what you have is most likely deposits deep in the ground that are formed out of ancient forests where there was carbon embedded in trees, and it has been turned into coal and oil and gas. And this stuff is sitting deep below the ground. And we humans are able to dig into the ground and extract these things. So coal, oil, gas are the fossil fuels. And then surrounding them, there is the entire energy industry where there are two kinds of pathways. Sometimes we take crude oil from the ground, we put it in a refinery, and that purifies it into several internal subcomponents. So crude oil is a mixture of many, many chemicals. One of them is petrol, one of them is diesel, one of them is aviation fuel, one of them is kerosene, one of them is naphtha, like that. All these things are broken out of their mixture, which is crude oil, inside a factory that is called a refinery. Okay, so crude oil comes out of the ground, it goes to a refinery makes all these subcomponents, and then those subcomponents directly come into our applications. For example, we put petrol in a car, we put diesel in a truck, we put fuel oil in an industrial heating system. And there, at the end game, there is the device, like an internal combustion engine that converts the energy embedded inside the petrol into the desired form of energy, that is the movement of the car, that is the kinetic energy of the car. Okay, so that's the journey that It was originally made deep inside the ground. We
Hmm.
pulled it out, we refined it, we transported it. It came to a petrol pump next to you, and you purchased some petrol, you stuck it in a car. The
Hmm.
car is a machine that knows how to burn petrol and turn it into the motion of the car, which has a physics name, kinetic energy. Okay. Alternatively, there is gas that comes out from inside the ground. We
Hmm.
grab it from inside the ground and we set up a whole piping system whereby the gas reaches your house either in the form of a pipe carrying the gas,
Yeah.
or in terms of these steel bottles that I think carry 50 kilograms of gas,
Hmm.
and they fire the burning unit, the heating unit in our kitchens, and we turn that knob and the gas flows out. The gas burns. When the gas burns, it becomes heat, and that heat gets transmitted to our cooker, and our rice gets cooked. Okay, so these are pathways of energy. Now,
Hmm.
in all this, and of course, there are more informal pathways, like there are very, very inefficient
Of
things that
course.
are done all over India, like burning cow dung. Now, that's, really extremely inefficient. Cow dung is a terrible source of energy and a great source of indoor air pollution. So
Hmm.
generally, that's not a wise way for anybody to go. It makes so much more sense to have a gobar gas plant
Hmm.
where the fermentation of the cow dung creates the gas, and the gas comes in the house and it burns clean. Okay, so
Correct.
that's
Yeah.
again something that everybody should be doing. All over India in winter, people almost casually burn little piles of wood in order to stay warm.
Hmm.
And in most of North India, that has proved to be an extreme disaster because of the nature of climate, because of the nature of the atmospheric system in North India, where the burning of wood and straw sends solid particulate matter into the air, and that has created the world's worst air quality crisis.
One
If
of the
any
reasons.
of our readers are in North India, just want to say that it is an absolutely terrible state of affairs, because in the winter, there is just so much burning that is happening, and there is no wind, there is no systematic way to get it out. For weeks and weeks, the air
Hmm.
quality in North India is just terrible. And the deep solution is you've got to stop burning anything. You got to stop burning agricultural residue. You got to stop burning the stubble of the fields. You got to stop the security people outside a complex in Delhi who huddle around a fire, burning wood, and so on. So all that burning that we are so casual about has actually turned into a health disaster in a different way.
Correct. Of course. Yeah.
Okay. And finally, the most important component of the energy system is electricity. Okay. Now, what is magical about electricity is that it is cheap and inexpensive to transport. So
Hmm.
you do have to put down the fixed costs of the electricity transmission and the electricity distribution system. But once that's done, the plug point in the wall is ever ready, that you throw a switch and we have access to electrical energy,
Hmm.
which is converted into various kinds of other forms of energy using devices. So electrical energy can go into a heater and it keeps you warm, and it does not involve burning solid particulate matter.
Right.
Electrical energy can go into an air conditioner and it makes you cold. Even better are these beautiful modern devices that are called heat pumps, which is just an air conditioner that can change its direction. So in summer, it is taking in hot air from outside and sending cold air inside. And in winter, it is taking cold air outside and sending hot air inside. Okay,
Well,
it's
that
just
sounds very economic, actually.
it's the exact same thing as an air conditioner. With
Right.
minor modifications, it becomes a heat pump, and it's much more efficient than a simple resistance load. So the old style electric heater is fuel inefficient, is energy inefficient compared with a heat pump. And that's another beautiful revolution happening. So in the parts of North India where you may have been cold enough to think of having a heater, which I don't think happens ever in Pune or Bombay, but in the places in India where it becomes cold enough that you feel like, oh, it would be nice to have a heater,
Hmm.
then this heat pump is the modern, beautiful technology to get it done. And it's really just an AC. So I believe that in the future, there will be no simple air conditioners in North India. It just makes no sense, because for a minor increase in the price, it becomes a heat pump. And then it is heating in the winter and cooling in the summer. Like it's
Which
a
is a
free lunch.
requirement for
And
both seasons up there. Absolutely.
and it does the heating much more efficiently than the conventional electrical resistance-based heater. Okay.
Okay, right.
And then you have modern magic where the electricity gets stored in a battery, and the battery sits inside a car, and in the car it drives a motor, and you get the mobility of a car. Okay, so you should just constantly see that in all this, basically, energy is being transformed from one form to another. And far away, there is an electricity generation utility where a variety of technologies generate the electricity. Now, what are these technologies? The main technologies are, case one, you burn coal or you burn gas, and that heat is used to turn a generator, and the generator makes electricity. Okay, so that is one kind of technology. Alternatively, you have a hydel plant where the kinetic energy of the falling water is fed to a generator. So it makes a generator rotate. A generator is the opposite of a motor. A motor takes electricity and makes rotational motion. A generator takes rotational motion and turns it into electricity. Okay. So in a hydel plant, there's falling water and it gets turned into electricity. Then we have the modern magic of a windmill where the wind rotates the blades of the generator. Rather, the wind rotates the blades of a windmill, and the windmill's blades are connected to a generator, and that generates electricity. So it's the same rotational energy to electrical transition in a windmill. And modern magic is solar photovoltaics, where the sunlight falls on a piece of semiconductor magic and it turns into electricity. And the incredible greatness of modern technology is that today the solar panels are cheaper than some plastic panels. So you can imagine that there exist pieces of plastic that cost more than pieces of solar cells. That's how cheap solar cells have become. This is just the bounty of modern technology. We in India have been the immense beneficiaries where all this technology has been developed abroad, and nobody in India had to pay for the R&D. We just get to import these things, and amazing levels of technology can be readily rolled out into the country because all this bounty is available in the world for free.
Also a need of the hour. So yeah, definitely something we can look forward
to. Okay, so this is my brief introduction to the field of energy. Does that fit what you wanted? What are the 16 questions that come to your mind?
No, absolutely. I love that you simplified this. But now the first question that does come to my mind from here is there's a discussion on transition to renewables, of actually decarbonizing the economy. But then where do we start? How do I explain to our listeners what even is happening in the country right now? Where does the electricity come from?
So at present, where the electricity comes from is largely from fossil fuels. Okay, so I don't have these numbers by heart, but very crudely, about 75 or 77% of the energy. So here now, can I please bore you with care on units? Okay, it is the bane of everybody's life in this field that we mix up the capacity to do things versus the things that are actually done. Okay, so when the unit of energy is a joule, and when 1 joule flows in 1 second, it is a watt. Okay, so WATT is a watt. So when we say that there is a light bulb that is 10 watts, then it means that in every 1 second, it consumes 10 joules. Okay? And in 3600 seconds, that is 1 hour, it consumes 1000. Sorry, it consumes 1 watt hour. Okay, 3600 seconds multiplied by 10 watts. So it consumes 10 watt hours. The billing unit that appears in our electricity bills is a horrible word. It's called a unit, which is just like a dumb word that nobody should use. What it stands for is 1000 watt hours. So if you run an appliance of 1000 watts, like a heater, for 1 hour, that is 1000 watt hours. Okay, so W, capital W is a watt, multiplied by an hour is a watt hour.
Good to know that this is how I'm going to read the bill next time on.
Correct. Okay. So one heater of 1000 watts that is running for 1 hour consumes 1000 watt hours, which is the same as 1 kilowatt hour. Kilo means 1000. Okay. So 1 kilowatt hour is 1000 watts running for 1 hour. And that is called 1 unit. And in India, that's typically about 8 rupees or something, 7 rupees, 6 rupees, 8 rupees. Okay. So, and this works in all kinds of calculations. So, for example, if you think that you have a light bulb which uses 10 watts, then it would have to run for 100 hours for you to run up 1000 watt hours, which is 1 unit, which is 6, 7, 8 rupees. Okay, so that 10 watt light bulb is very cheap because when it runs for 100 hours, it is some 7 rupees or 700 paise. So it is 7 paise per hour. Okay, so that's a light bulb. So there are two ways to think about the energy system. When you think of a factory, its capacity is measured in watts. So for example, I would say that this factory can make 1000 million watts. Okay, 1000 million is the capital G is a giga. Okay, so 1 gigawatt plant is a plant that is capable of producing 1 gigawatts. But the question arises, how many seconds has it actually worked? And that is the unit that we should be thinking of when we look at the overall Indian energy system, that how much energy was generated as opposed to how much capacity was there, because the capacity may or may not be running. Okay, so there's a lot of accent on capacity. You think of a 1 gigawatt plant, but how many hours the plant runs can vary, and particularly in the case of renewables. The solar plants are only working properly when the sun is shining. In the early morning and in the late evening, they're really generating very little. At night, they're generating absolutely nothing. Similarly, with wind, the wind turns out to be blowing about a quarter of the time. For 3/4 of the time, the windmill is really not generating a lot of electricity. So when you say that I have a 100 megawatt windmill facility, it's actually not going to generate at that full capacity all the time.
Right.
So that's why we should make a distinction between generation capacity measured in watts, whereas energy should be measured in watt hours. And that gives you a different picture. And I will only focus on energy generated because in the end, we don't care how it got done. What we care is what got done. So in terms of the Indian energy generation capacity, about 77% or so is coal-fired. There is some amount of hydel. There is a little bit of nuclear. There is some amount of gas. And there is about 11% is renewables as of today. So renewables is really very, very little. A tiny proportion of the Indian energy system is renewable. So there's a lot of hype and people tend to talk a lot about renewables. But really what is there on the ground is about 11% of the energy produced is renewables. For comparison, China today is at about 33%. So they're significantly ahead of us. Many of the advanced economies have moved even more in terms of decarbonizing. So there's a whole spectrum. So decarbonizing is the journey of shutting down all the coal-fired plants and all the gas-fired plants and replacing them by an entirely renewable system, which includes hydel and which also includes nuclear, meaning there is no practical limit on the amount of nuclear energy that can be produced. That it's not an exhaustible resource coming out of the ground. It would take me some time to explain, but effectively there is infinite possibility to do nuclear, and it does not generate global warming. There is no carbon dioxide emission. So the whole renewable transition is the business of using solar, windmill, hydel, and nuclear to bring an end to coal and oil. Now, when you put it like this, it seems a little startling. There is vast amounts of money and many, many employees inside the coal and oil and gas industries.
Right. Yes.
And as I said, very little movement has happened in India. Only 11% of energy production currently is renewable. But I consider it a certainty that It's only a question of when, not whether, that all the coal polluting, all the carbon-based polluting energy production systems will have to shut down. And this has huge implications for the firms, the entrepreneurs, the individuals working in these organizations, the financiers, the lenders, the equity shareholders. All of them are going to need to change their lives, reflecting the fact that carbon dioxide is a deadly pollutant which damages the entire world.
Of course. And the implications of these are huge, while at the same time, we know that this is imperative. We have to be doing this because currently we are facing issues directly based on our energy sectors, uh, dependence on coal as well as dependence on
Correct.
fossil fuels.
Yeah, so
which
it's a
is
very
pretty-
tough thing that on one hand, the world needs to change over to renewables, but at the same time, today, who is there to produce it? It is the fossil fuel guys. You can't
Correct.
switch them off suddenly. And yet, they are looking very nervously at the world and saying, you know what? I know that you don't want me and that you're going to throw me out of the global energy system gradually. So it's a very awkward relationship that, one has to nurture the fossil fuel industry as a requirement today, and then develop the transition program by which one by one this stuff shuts down. And there are great debates in the world about how best this can be achieved. And there are two schools of thought. It can be done in a more planning way, or it can be done in a more markets way. And if you are excited about these things, I'm happy to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think before that, I want to also address one small thing, right, about energy access. Now, India is the third largest energy consuming country in the world. And at the same time, its per capita consumption of energy is only a third of the global average. Now, these are all just like very loose figures or statistics because no one can really pinpoint the consumption in India per capita because it's a diverse country, not very well mapped out in terms of meters and electric. But even then, if you consider how much consumption happens compared to bigger economies like US and China, it is far, far lesser. So I'm wondering how this fits into the larger energy landscape in the country right now. Yeah.
So India, being a poor country, does, as you say correctly, does not use a whole lot of energy per capita. But we all hope that there is a process of economic growth taking place in India, and over the years, prosperity will go up. And generally, with prosperity, there does come an increased energy intensity of the economy. Okay, so there will be a need for more energy. Now, if the Indian energy system just continues to go in the present direction, then there will be a vast increase in coal-fired and gas-fired energy, which would greatly increase the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This will harm the whole world, and remember, it will also harm India. Okay, so there are two parts to this. There is a climate justice perspective, where there are people in India who will say that the advanced economies got rich by putting carbon dioxide into the air. Now it's our turn. Okay. On the other hand, it is also true that India has skin in the game, that global warming would be a catastrophe for India as well.
Absolutely.
It's not like we are living on another planet. We are living on the same planet. Okay. And if you wish, I'm happy to talk about describing the ways in which global warming will play out in India. I feel this has not been adequately discussed in the Indian landscape, but it's not an energy systems question. It's a climate adaptation question. Maybe we should keep it for another day. So I just want to say to all our readers that there is a very big problem for India, which is that it is not possible for India to escape adverse consequences of global warming. So I want to make a peculiar statement here. If you were Sri Lanka, there is a bit of a decoupling of the two. Sri Lanka can be irresponsible and recklessly put carbon dioxide into the air because the magnitudes of carbon dioxide that Sri Lanka would put into the air are so small. It doesn't matter. It doesn't shake the needle of the global carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere. It's not true for India. India is so big that if India gets going, pushing carbon dioxide into the air, it will make a material difference to the world.
Right.
Okay, so Sri Lankan emissions don't make a difference to the rising waters on the coast of Sri Lanka. But Indian emissions make a material difference to the rising waters on the coast of India. Okay, so the Indian optimization is a little different from small countries. Similarly for China. Okay, so
one of the reasons why I think the world is so focused on where Indian economy as well as like the transition to renewable, sustainable energy transition is happening in the country, I think. Right.
Yeah. So the problem that has to be attacked is that is there a way to reconcile economic growth with renewables? And the answer is yes, because in the last 30 years, elsewhere in the world, a gigantic level of research has been done, and there is a bounty of new science and technology in terms of better technologies for solar photovoltaics, better technologies for wind, and better technologies for storage. And we ain't done. There's more innovation, there is more science that will come along. There is a possibility of a magical thing called geological hydrogen that may prove to be another powerful tool in the global energy system. Okay, so in a way, we in India are getting this mixed bag. On the one hand, the advanced economies made a lot of carbon dioxide, put it in the air, and that restricts what we can do. On the other hand, the advanced economies made a lot of technology, and that constitutes our solution. Okay, so that's like it's a mixed bag, and there is a lot of this kind of give and take which occurs across every sector. So as an example, here is another story. The advanced economies made the CPUs and the operating systems and the computer revolution. Okay, we in India did not do anything to contribute towards that, anything material. And that is the biggest industry of India. So if there is one thing that India does,
almost stereotyped into this.
Correct. If there is one thing that India does, it is IT. Okay, so the advanced economies have been very good to India. They've done the R&D, they've built the factories, they've made the technology, they've made the CPUs, they've made the computers. The companies from the advanced economies are the capital providers to IT companies in India, and they are the customers, they buy back the IT. Okay, so this is like a pure bounty where the rest of the world did things that were very good for India. In the case of carbon dioxide, the rest of the world did things that are bad for India, that they filled up the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. Like that. I mean, there's a lot of give and take that happens all over the world. Okay, and we in India win in some respects and we lose in some respects. Any individual thing can be taken out and you can make a big fuss about it. Okay, so we in India are great beneficiaries because some mad people in Britain drafted the Magna Carta in 1215 AD. Okay, so hundreds of years before political knowledge was developing in India, some blokes in the UK wrote the Magna Carta, and we are the beneficiaries of that. Like that. So ideas develop all over the world, and there are many, many influences that happen, and I don't share an angry way of debating these. Okay, like let the past be gone. There's no point debating what happened 200 years ago and 500 years ago. Okay, we are where we are, and where we are is that it will become hard and unpleasant for India to emit carbon dioxide into the air, partly because we are a large emitter. Okay, we are now the world's third largest emitter. By the way, we crossed the entire European Union. You said the third largest country. Well, the rank 4 in that listing is not a country, is an entire group of countries.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, it is the entire Europe put together, which is a bigger GDP than the United States. Today has less carbon emissions than India. Okay, they've gone ahead and done so much movement to renewables that now India is the third largest emitter in the world. So if India continues on the present trajectory, part one, we will materially add carbon dioxide into the air, and that will cause damage to India because the planet will become warm and we will suffer. We have a sixth of the world's population, and so a sixth of the misery, a sixth of the tears that come from global warming will be in India. And It is in our self-interest to not do that. And second is this is a global problem. We have to collaborate with the advanced economies in finding solutions to this thing. So otherwise it becomes unpleasant. And then other countries will start trying to use coercive means to fight with India and say, you are the wrecker, you are the one putting carbon dioxide into the air. And that will have other unpleasant ramifications for India.
Which goes both ways, right? While we need to step up and take responsibility, even in terms of energy access point of view, I think it's imperative that India uh, does step up and take responsibility that almost half the population does not have access to full-fledged electricity and the implications of that. But at the same time, the discussion then always shifts into how um, developed economies have to help and fund this
So look,
transition.
there is a foreign policy negotiation around developed economies putting down some money to help on the Indian energy transition. It's a negotiation, and I am convinced that some money should come, and I'm convinced that some money will come. Okay, so there's a very nice global initiative that is called the JETP, Just Energy Transition Program, where
Yes.
roughly speaking, what will happen is the state of Maharashtra will get assistance for the government actions that are required in the energy transition. Okay, so it will help to overcome political economy problems. It will help to do the rehabilitation and resettlement of coal mines and coal thermal workers, and basically get the Maharashtra economy into a net zero state. Okay, for the rest, the point is to create conditions where the private sector will do those renewables investments
So
and build.
I'm going to interrupt you just a second because I want to address what net zero is. I don't think everybody is really quite aware. This word is thrown around quite a bit,
Yeah.
but what does it really mean?
So the story runs that there was a Paris agreement between many countries, which was a bit of a fail, where the countries promised to try to bring down carbon emissions. And note, it was not promised to bring down carbon emissions. It was promised to try to bring down carbon emissions. So there were very soft commitments that were made, and really nothing great got done. Then I would like to nominate Donald Trump for the Nobel Prize for Peace, because then Trump became president of the United States and he pulled the United States out of the Paris Agreement. And that was a turning point in the story of global energy. Because until that point, people were sort of waiting and expecting for a certain amount of United States leadership. And when Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Agreement, then the rest of the countries galvanized themselves on saying, oh my God, we got to do this. And I think it helped crystallize a decisive movement towards solving the problem of climate change with or without the United States.
Right.
And particularly in Europe, but really in all the advanced economies, we started getting a tremendous push to make progress. And that push has translated into two main ideas. Okay, the first idea is called net zero. Net zero is a world where the company or the country or the world pushes net zero carbon dioxide into the air per year. Okay, so imagine a whole year goes by and the net contribution of additional carbon dioxide into the air is zero. Now, why do we say net zero and not gross zero? The answer is that it is felt that for a long time, there may be certain applications of fossil fuels that are really hard to abate. It may be very difficult to make a long distance truck that does not use diesel. It may be very difficult to make a ship that works on the high seas without using liquid fuels. So there may be some applications where carbon dioxide emission is inevitable. And so the modern strategy is okay, very well. Then side by side with that, you need to put up a factory which will use solar energy or renewable electricity.
Right.
And it will pluck carbon dioxide from the air and put it into the ground. Okay.
That would
So,
be,
conceptually imagine we're going to make natural gas out of carbon dioxide in the air, and we'll put it back into the ground as a natural gas deposit. Okay, and you have to do this at a magnitude that reverses the low level of carbon dioxide emission that is associated with a few technologies. Okay, so like similarly, some amount of crude oil will be used to make petrochemicals, and petrochemicals are just the universal feedstock in the chemicals industry. So a small amount of crude oil will generate carbon dioxide into the air. There will be a tiny crude oil industry left in the world. Very well.
That would be
Then
the
back to
dream,
back.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be the dream.
Yeah. So the dream then is not to shut down all the oil extraction and oil refineries of the world, but to keep a tenth of it or a 20th of it. So imagine 2%, 5% of the present state of the global crude oil industry would be there for a long, long time. Very well. In that case, you need the commensurate decarbonization process where you are grabbing carbon dioxide from the air, converting it into something that can be put into the ground. You make gas or you make some kind of wood, you make something out of carbon dioxide in the air, and you bury it deep under the earth where it will hide for at least 1,000 years. Basically, carbon dioxide sits around in the air for at least 1,000 years. So you need to get it out of the picture for 1,000 years. Okay, so that's the word net zero. And all over the world, the decision-making units of one company or one country or the entire planet are grappling with this question of what is my journey to net zero. There are better Indian companies who have already reached net zero today. There are good Indian companies who have deadlines like 2030 or 2035, which is not so far away. Okay, remember 2035 is only 11 years away.
Absolutely.
There are good Indian companies who have a 2035 deadline for achieving net zero. There are some companies in India already who are at net zero, where all their energy buying is guaranteed to be renewables. They are not using any energy other than renewable energy today. Okay, so this is the net zero journey that one by one company at a time, one country at a time needs to flip the switch and go to net zero. And along with that, there will be a slow decline because there will be people who refuse to use fossil fuel energy.
Right. Yes, so we have covered net zero. We've covered what the energy mix of India is, how we even get the electricity that we get at home, for example. But now I want to move a little towards the just energy transition, right? Because there is so much at stake in actually transitioning, like we discussed earlier, from fossil fuel-based energy mix to renewables. One. In one of your papers, you have like it is the paper's title for anyone who's interested is lowest hanging fruit on the coconut tree. And I really enjoyed reading this. You also have a YouTube video that sort of explains for those of us who probably feel reading is a bit of an effort. um, You've raised the argument that the Indian electricity sector is ill-suited and, in fact, one of the major roadblocks for a successful climate transition in the country is the public sector categorization of how the electricity is distributed, produced as well. Why do you think so? And could you delve into that a little bit?
So there are 2, 3 steps in this journey. Some of them are widely understood, some less so. Okay, my co-author Akshay Jaitley and I built this, what we affectionately call the coconut paper. Yes, this is our attempt at adding value in this subject. So let's start at step 1. I think everybody agrees that most states in India have difficulties with public sector distribution companies. Okay, so distribution is the last mile natural monopoly where somebody runs a wire to your house and sells you electricity. So the distribution company buys wholesale electricity from the generators and sells it to the end household or the office or the industrial user. And all over India, many, but not all, public sector distribution companies seem to work pretty badly. The shining exception is Gujarat. Gujarat runs a damn decent government-run distribution company. Okay, so I don't want to be absolutist about it, that there are some places where this can work. We should be pragmatic about it. In most places, it doesn't work. Okay,
Right.
and what is happening is that distribution companies owned by the government are plagued by underinvestment in the distribution system, by electricity theft, and a government-controlled distribution system tends to go with government-controlled prices of electricity. And then there is always political pressure to underprice the electricity, and then you have a mess.
Right.
So there are people who are stealing electricity, there are people who are getting free electricity, there are people who are underpaying for electricity. The distribution company is perennially broke. The distribution company does not have money to invest in the distribution system, and this whole thing is a mess. Now, from the viewpoint of a private person, like if you build a private transmission capacity, these are the wholesale lines. Think of these as the super highways that connect up various pieces of the electricity system. So the distribution company is the small patli gully running to your house, whereas the transmission system are the big super highways. For a private person building a transmission capability or a generation capability, the choke point is that they have to sell to the distribution companies. But most public sector distribution companies in India are bankrupt, and they will not pay correctly to a private vendor. This problem has basically led to a choking of investment in the Indian electricity sector, to a point where today, barring Gujarat and a couple of other specialized situations, if you go walk around in the financial system in Bombay and try to say that I want to build a renewable electricity generation factory, which will sell to the grid in XYZ state, then generally the financial system will say, no, this doesn't make sense, because there's this whole problem that you don't get paid. And no private person is going to commit to an investment if there is a high likelihood that in the end, you're not going to get paid. Okay, so this is one part of the story, that the basics of this industry are broken and have been broken for a long time. Okay, and so governments keep putting in subsidies. The state government keeps putting in a subsidy into the local distribution company, and the distribution company is a mess. There are power cuts all over India. They use a quaint euphemism in the field of electricity, which is intermittency, which is a way of saying grid unreliability, that the damn thing doesn't work. Okay, so this is part one of the problem. This is fairly well known and fairly well understood that all over India, the electricity system doesn't work well.
So when you mention the grid, I assume you mean the grid that connects all the apartments, the industries, everything that uses the electricity from the source, the closest source. And it's a close-knit network throughout the country, or is it state-specific?
I mean, each state runs its own grid, and they are all interconnected using some highways.
Right. Yeah, that's all I want to.
Yeah, sorry, there's too much specialized terminology in this field.
I think that's where we can actually start to unpack the jargons here.
Yeah. So this is problem number one, and it is widely understood. All over India, there have been many experiments in bringing the private sector into electricity distribution. Sometimes it is done explicitly and directly, where a private person owns the entire distribution system. Sometimes it is done with a so-called franchisee model. By and large, I think the verdict is that it's about 50-50 so far. About half of the private distribution companies have worked well, about half have not. So I don't want to imply, so on both sides, I don't want to imply that all the government distribution systems are broken, because actually Gujarat works. And I don't want to imply that all privatization works, because actually half the time it has not worked so well.
Okay.
But it is also true that if you want to look around the country and find good, successful distribution systems, they are almost entirely private. It is Bombay with BSES, it is Surat, it is Ahmedabad, it is Calcutta, okay, Jyoti Basu, and the CPIM understood that there was no hope in hell of the communist paradise. So they brought in a Marwadi private vendor to run the electricity distribution system of Calcutta. Okay. Delhi is a nice case study where a privatization was done, and all in all, it has delivered gains. It's not perfect. The Tata piece works better than, it's not BSES, it's called Reliance Energy. The Tata piece works better than the Reliance piece. but still both work better than the way distribution in Delhi used to be earlier. And there are many other such examples. So I would cautiously say three things: that most public sector distribution works poorly. Many private sector distribution stories have worked out well. The best distribution systems in India are private, even in Gujarat. Okay, when it comes to Ahmedabad and Surat, it's a private distribution company. While the Gujarat State Electricity Board works better than any other state electricity board in India, the fact remains that when you get to Gujarat, the two big cities of Ahmedabad and Surat are private and they work very well. And also the fact that there have been, I think, about 32 experiments with private sector participation in distribution so far, and about half have worked. Today, that has also created a body of knowledge that now we can study many, many experiments, and we know some things about what works and what doesn't work. And so I think in the future, private participation in distribution will go better. Okay, so this is one part of the story that is old and well understood.
Right, right.
There's a second part of the story where Akshay and I have some novel thoughts and views on how to approach India and the energy transition. This is about the role of central planning and control by officials versus having this evolve in an organic way. Currently, the energy system in India is basically run by the government. Okay, so the government controls most of the story, they control most transmission, they control most generation. So when a renewable facility has to come up, often it is the government that decides that at this location, we will put up a solar power plant. And then they will run a procurement.
Right.
And get a private guy to run it. But the private guy did not think it. The government thought it. The government chose, the government imagined that we will have a solar facility here. And then they give the private guy a 20-year contract. Okay, so this is superficially private, but actually the heavy thinking is being done by a government person. Okay, the planning is being done by government people, and they are strategizing this whole thing. And this has deep limitations because governments are not good at organizing an industry. Okay, so we have seen so many industries in India. By and large, as long as there is government control, it does not work too well. Look into the future. There is so much uncertainty about the future. How will renewable generation technologies change in the future? Okay, nobody knows. Meaning we know what is there today. We don't know what the next 5 years, the next 10 years will look like. Will small modular reactors work well? We don't know whether it will work out well or not. What are the good storage technologies? How will storage evolve? We don't know. Okay, there's a great deal of uncertainty about the future on how the electricity system will work out. When faced with this kind of uncertainty, the tool of choice is the private sector.
Right.
Okay, so in every industry in the world, there is uncertainty. Okay, do you know what kind of biscuits will work 10 years from now? No, you have no idea. There is risk, there is uncertainty. Various people will launch various products. Some will work and make a lot of money. Some will fail and go bankrupt. That's called business. That's called capitalism. That risk taking is integral to capitalism, and nobody knows what the future holds. No official knows what the future holds. And officials are not good at analyzing and predicting the future. And most important, officials are very bad at taking risk. Officials will be risk averse. They'll just do a few sure things. And the global energy transition is too big a problem for it to be controlled and led by officials. So Akshay and I argue that it's much better to approach this through a market-based mechanism, where the pieces run like this, that point one, what you need is a fairly high tax on carbon. Okay, so it's a simple intuition of the world of pollution, that if you make a polluting product, then you should have to pay a tax. If you're going to emit carbon dioxide into the air, you are harming other people, and you should have to pay a tax. Okay, and then that will lead to a decline of carbon-based energy generation because it is being taxed. It becomes less profitable. And on the side, a renewables revolution is happening. So the renewable people will be investing more and more. Now comes the question of price. What should the price of electricity be? And our big idea is the price of electricity should happen on the market. That there should be supply and demand, and every 15 minutes, every 1 minute, the price of electricity should change. So
Hmm.
moment to moment, if the sun is shining, lots of solar energy is coming out, then the price of electricity should go down. And many times it will even go down to near zero levels.
Right.
And then comes the evening, the sun goes away. The sun is a fickle friend. There is no guarantee that the sun will be there. So in the evening, when the sun goes down, there will be a shortage of electricity
Hmm.
because in the evening we go home and we switch on various devices. And then the price of electricity should go up because at high prices, people will consume less electricity. And at a high price, people will make more electricity. At a high price, people will find the business justification for storage. So a
Right.
storage company will buy electricity in the afternoon when it's cheap and sell it in the evening when it is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
All this involves prices and fluctuation. And that is something that the private sector does. Private people deal with prices and fluctuations in everything in their lives. The price of nickel fluctuates, the price of ball bearings fluctuates, the price of wheat fluctuates. That is called capitalism. That is called the market economy. So this is not new. We accept fluctuating prices in everything. We'll have to accept fluctuating prices in one more thing.
Do you think, though, that this might actually impact people who find it already unaffordable to sort of get access to energy right now, considering even when it is subsidized and highly um, like almost free in certain cases by the government?
So there is a subsidy debate, and I'm happy to have that debate. That if you were thinking public finance, would you use scarce government money to pay subsidies, to pay an electricity subsidy? And by and large, the answer is no. Okay, the job of government is to do government. The job of government is to build the judiciary and the courts and the air quality regulatory system and so on. Those are good uses of money, and there is not enough money going around to do all those fundamental things. So it's a bad use of public money to run subsidy systems. Okay, like look, lots of things are expensive. Clothes can be expensive. Does the government subsidize clothes? And so on. So we should not think that because things are costly, it is the job of government to solve that.
It's
It
a
is not the
similar
job.
debate in water management as well, right?
Yes.
Because people recklessly use water since it's almost free, and most places there are no water meters at all.
Yeah.
So in the same way, I get where your argument is coming from, where if you actually put a price on it, which can fluctuate, it incentivizes people to actually switch to renewables.
And
First
also
of all,
things should have a price. Okay.
right.
Like it just is the basic sanity and justice of the world that if you buy certain products and services from the market economy, you should have to pay for it. So this whole free culture is something that I find mystifying. That every household in the world is an economic actor. You produce some goods and services, the universe pays you for them, and then you use that to buy some things of your choice. And there is a poverty problem in India. India is a very, very poor country, and the answer is economic growth. And the engine of capitalism is able to do economic growth if we create conditions for economic growth. And once again, that means not getting into this kind of subsidy systems, but actually having a market economy. That is the secret of growth.
But then for more economic growth, of course, the energy consumption goes up. And now I am actually thinking of this as a positive statement, because when you propose something which is more privatized, it probably incentivizes people to have solar panels, to have more renewable capacities, biogas plants at home to suffice their individual needs. And then the surplus can be put back into the grid, like we mentioned.
All in all, personalized windmills and solar panels are less good than meets the eye because they're actually subscale and inefficient. Okay, in India, because the electricity system is so broken and households are being charged very high prices for electricity, it has become extremely attractive to have a rooftop solar panel.
Right.
The trade-offs are less good once you fix the mistakes of the Indian energy system. Actually, there are economies of scale.
This actually would be better, and the prices would come down if it was privatized.
Yes, a proper market-based electricity system net would deliver a lower price of electricity. What is happening right now is there are only a few bakras who are paying for electricity. There are urban affluent households, and there are offices, and there are factories. These are the only people paying for electricity. Everybody else is either stealing electricity or getting electricity free. So right now, the prices paid by the few bakras is out of the world. On top of that, it's a centrally planned public sector system, and those are very inefficient things. When you get to private production, you'll do it better. So at present, rooftop solar appears very attractive in India because for a typical household, the trade-off is that instead of being socked with very unfair charges by the Maharashtra State Electricity Board, you'll put up your own rooftop solar and you will get what appears to be a very good deal. It's a less good deal if we fix the mistakes of the electricity system. In a more sensible electricity system, what makes spectacular sense is a little bit of scale. What you need is a 1 megawatt solar generating facility. What you need is a 10 megawatt wind facility. Those have economies of scale, and that they work out better as compared to each household doing it.
So a community-led effort could actually be better.
Come again?
A community-led effort, for example.
Not community, just companies.
Smaller scale housing societies or...
You just want a private company, that's all. Okay, so like, do you make your own shirts? Like, yeah, you can, but mostly we just buy our shirts. And the shirt factory has scale. Technically, each of us, we can make a shirt at home, but you know, how likely are we to do it? It's subscale, it's inefficient to try to find a sewing machine and learn how to make a shirt and all that. There's too much skill that goes into that. It's better to have specialized companies that just know one thing and do it well, and they're super efficient in doing it.
Right. Yeah, so when we talk about all these issues that come from the interplay of state and center versus privatization, where do you think are the major roadblocks? So to say, to summarize what you said earlier, and if this is the case, then where are we headed? What are the opportunities that come up?
So at present, 11% of the energy generation in India is renewables. The rest of it is putting carbon dioxide into the air, and it will become increasingly unpleasant for India. It is turning into a foreign policy issue where India is more recalcitrant than most countries in terms of dragging its feet on the climate transition. And one by one, the countries of the world are putting up carbon border taxes. So if you are a company in India producing goods and services that are being sold to an importer abroad, for example, the entire Indian software industry, the entire Indian business process outsourcing industry is buying carbon intensive electricity. When their goods and services are sold into the advanced economies, one by one, there will be carbon border taxes where there will be taxation at the other end to penalize the carbon production that has happened in India.
Right. And I know that the EU has put forth such in its Green Deal, they're rigorous.
They've got a starting date of 2026.
Right.
Okay. Similarly, it is widely expected that the UK will be 2027. And there are a couple of other countries building this. And I believe it is inevitable. It will come everywhere. It's like the value-added tax. It will basically be everywhere.
Correct.
So there will be increasing pressure in India on trying to fix the system. And what is needed is state by state. The focus of action is state governments. Okay, electricity is largely a state subject. And each state of India is different. So, you know, Kerala has to think for itself. Tamil Nadu has to think for itself. Maharashtra has to think for itself. For what is the path to net zero in Maharashtra? What is the path to net zero in Kerala? Each one has to figure out themselves. And it will involve this kind of combination of knowledge and ideas of privatization, of distribution, of taxation, of carbon, of trying to find some amount of overseas funding of just economic transition program to pay for transition costs, including political economy and the R&R of coal miners and coal thermal plants and fossil fuel related industries. And so I think that it's not an India story, it's a subnational story. Each state has to fend for itself. So for example, Gujarat is a highly exporting state. Tamil Nadu is a highly exporting state. So then it makes more sense for them to run faster and get to this full package of eliminating carbon from their state and building a modern electricity system, of having prices that fluctuate, of having a private distribution company and having private generation and having supply and demand make the price, all these things. This is the recipe that basically just let it work out through market forces and focus only on one thing, that we have to tax the hell out of carbon-based generation so that it just gets very disincentivized, and one by one, the fossil fuel companies will shut down.
Are there any actual case studies or examples that you have found to support this argument? I know you keep referring to Gujarat as well, but has that also proven that probably the lowest rung of the economic end user, right, gets to benefit out of this as well? Or will it actually alienate the population even further from energy access?
So there is a political economy puzzle in all this. And I think of it as sophisticated political thinking that will overcome this. Okay, and I just want to say, all through the reforms journey from the 80s onwards, there have always been difficult political economy problems, and they have been overcome. So I'm not a pessimist about political economy bottlenecks. There will always be pockets of interests who will be very excited about some issue. And it's a matter of how to diffuse it, how to solve it, and bring enough other attractive things on the table that justifies the overall transition. So we need to study the political economy. We need a field that is called quantitative political economy, where we are understanding households deeply, and we are understanding who gains and who loses from the electricity reform. And then we need sophisticated politicians and officials. For example, the kind of people who led the Indian economic reforms that ran from the 80s till about 2011. Okay, that kind of intellectual capacity and political sophistication is required by policymakers, by thinkers, by officials, and then this kind of thing can be done. So I recognize that there are these difficulties, but then I'm not despondent. That it's not that it can't be done. It's a matter of picking up our wits and doing them.
Right.
What will not work is the Sarkari approach, which is we in India are stuck in a government-led system, and we think that the officials will centrally plan the energy transition, and that's going to work poorly. Here's a sophisticated economics proposition. The centrally planned energy transition will impose higher costs upon the economy as compared to a market-based transition. Okay, so we have deep economic knowledge on this subject. That if the government tries to say that the minimum fuel efficiency of a car shall be so much, and I will give a subsidy for electric vehicles of so much, okay, these are all regulatory interventions. They will impose a greater cost upon society for the desired carbon transition compared to what I have described. It's complicated explaining why that is the case. Right now, I request you to just hear the proposition and give me some benefit of the doubt. And the key proposition is that a carbon tax plus a private sector-led solution is the lowest cost of decarbonization to society. So the society gets its job done at the lowest possible cost when the only lever of change that is imposed is the carbon tax. There is no better way to get a decarbonization than taxation of carbon. Every other way is costlier. Okay? It may make you feel good that, oh, we are subsidizing electric vehicles, or, oh, we have imposed a standard that every petrol car sold in the country has to have a minimum fuel efficiency of highway efficiency of 20 kilometers per liter, whatever. It may make you feel good. Or the government may say, we have given out a contract for 10 gigawatts of solar electricity. All these are less good ways. Okay?
Than a direct carbon tax.
Yes. Right. There is deep economics knowledge around this one proposition, that the most efficient way to get the job done, the lowest cost to society for getting the job done, is to not do all the other interventions and to do only one intervention, that is the carbon tax. And then it's iterative, that you just got to say, okay, I want a net zero by 2040. And so every year we will keep on raising the carbon tax until we see the carbon going away. So how much should the carbon tax be? I don't know, and nobody knows. And we're here to discover that. Imagine we set the tax for a 3-year period, hold it fixed, watch the change, guarantee to everybody that it's going to go up in the next 3 years. So on a 3-year period, we keep raising the taxes. And so in about 10, 15 years, the entire carbon goes away. So, it is realistically feasible to achieve the entire Indian energy transition in 10, 15, 20 years. And this is something that the government system is incapable of doing in their centrally planned way, because the vastness of the transformation required is beyond normal Sarkari people.
Absolutely. Of course, I mean, private players will have to. In fact, even individuals have a role to play in providing a just pathway. But what are some of the policies that you see make sense right now, or actually have some hope for? Are there any such?
Well, there's one big factor that needs to be done right, which is full access to all the global technologies. So when you put customs duties on solar panels, which is driving up the cost of renewable energy in India. So that makes no sense at all. For the rest, this is suspiciously sounding like a silver bullet, and I normally hate to push silver bullet solutions. But at heart, there's only one story, which is that it should be a private sector-led electricity system. And that's what Akshay Jaitley and I have described in our paper. And then you've got the highway open for decarbonization. And then there is only one number to choose every year, which is what's the level of carbon taxation. And just year after year, you keep ramping up the carbon tax, and the fossil fuels will go away. And the private sector will figure out the lowest cost of transition. And by the way, nobody is proposing an overall aggregate increased burden of taxation for the country. Okay, what all over the world is being done is the carbon tax goes back to back with a reduction of other taxes so that it's revenue neutral. So you cut the GST rate, basically. You tax carbon and you cut the GST rate. So everybody benefits because the GST touches everybody. So India anyway has a giant public finance problem because the GST rate is very, very high. And so really what you want to see is that X trillion rupees are coming in from the carbon tax, and you do commensurate cuts in the GST rates so as to lose X trillion rupees in the GST. So the aggregate taxation in the economy is neutral, but the taxes are paid by the users of polluting fuels.
This would be very interesting to actually test out and see where the good parts as well as the sort of pitfalls, that gap areas that need to be filled in.
Yeah.
I would love to know more about where this heads, this idea goes through. I think most important stuff that I focus on the podcast that we like to do here is to figure out what is the role of the individual in all of these discussions, right? And energy is one such subject where I feel it's hard to ask this question first of all, but also get a sort of conclusive answer, because some of the other questions, yes, sure, waste management, you try and consume less, reuse, recycle. But in energy, individual always comes as the last endpoint, almost like a consumer, and that's all.
Correct.
Since we are tiny blips when it comes to kind of manufacturing this. But I will still go ahead and ask this question as to what do you think is the role of me as an individual trying to make sure that I want to live in a climate friendly and environmentally conscious way?
So there is a romantic view around personal scale solar and wind generation, and as I said, it's less good than it looks. It's actually very inefficient, and so it feels cute, but it's not such a great idea. I feel really unhappy when people will cut trees to make space for rooftop solar, and that's just a very sad trade-off, because that has its own adverse consequences. So I'm not very excited about rooftop solar or personal home level windmills, though maybe those technologies will get better in the future. Currently, they're not great. Currently, the nightmare that most of us face as individuals is the usurious price of electricity. That we're being socked, most of us are being socked with very high energy prices that pay for the cross subsidy system, where a large number of people in India pay nothing. Okay, there is theft of electricity happening on a large scale, and the government subsidizes some people on a large scale. And basically, the first port of call is political action to say, how dare you? Okay, so we've got to question the political foundations of this cross subsidy system. So we've just got to insist that no, everybody will pay the same for electricity.
Yeah, I love this discussion, and I think on that note, I will have to end this. However, I want to do a follow-up episode delving into a little bit of the intricacies and the thoughts that you've put forth. Yeah, thank you so much. And if there are any concluding thoughts, I want to definitely hear them.
No, this is all. There is a larger field of climate change in India. There are two wings. There is decarbonization and there is climate adaptation. And each of these requires, immense effort of first principles thinking. And a lot of us have to get involved because these are big, horrible problems. And by and large, the super tanker of the Indian economy is moving fairly badly on both fronts.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. And this is an issue, right? Adaptation, mitigation, but at the same time, parallelly adjusting to the present problems has to all of it has to happen together. And there's a lot that you've given to think about, especially in terms of uh, I think it's a radical approach because most of the discussions at COP or even beyond at any of these conclaves happens around how governments can come together or even a standalone work towards uh, changing the systems in place.
No, we need government action in all this. We need the government to act positively on privatization, on exiting its central planning role and control of the working
Right.
of the electricity system. And we need the government to build and run the carbon tax.
As a more regulatory body.
Yeah, so then there's a little bit of a regulation piece left in the electricity system. But above all, it is the journey of getting the electricity sector out of central planning into a private-led model. And it is the journey of building and running a carbon tax. These are things that government has to do.
Right. Thank you so much, and hope to do another episode and delve deeper into these issues.
Happy to.